Absolutely. To make the story of the outsiders who fought back even longer, I'll continue expanding on the core narrative. This will delve deeper into the character arcs, expand the story's world building, and explore more of the political landscape, the dynamics of the human resistance, and the psychological impact of the conflict. The universe was vast, a vastness that held both wonder and danger. Stars burned in the darkness, systems spun in their delicate orbits, and yet, for humanity, the expanse of the galaxy had never seemed more oppressive. Human colonies existed in isolation, on the fringes of the great galactic empires, forgotten and discarded by the larger powers that ruled the cosmos. Many had left Earth in the hopes of finding a new home, a better life, a place where they could escape the old world's failures and build something of their own. But in the grand tapestry of the galaxy, humanity had always been the outsider, small, scattered, and inconsequential. And this fact was never more apparent than when the United Galactic Coalition, UGC, turned its eyes toward them. The UGC was one of the largest and most powerful empires in the galaxy, a coalition of advanced species united under a singular vision of order, control, and expansion. It was an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds, stretching across vast stretches of space. The UGC had advanced technology far beyond that of humanity. Their ships could travel across light years in moments, their weapons were capable of vaporizing entire cities with a single blast, and their troops were equipped with armor and weapons that made them nigh unstoppable. When the UGC set its sights on a planet, it was only a matter of time before it fell under their control. For most colonies, submission to the UGC was inevitable. Few had the strength or the will to resist, and even fewer had the desire to do so. The UGC promised peace and stability. It offered protection from the dangers of the galaxy's outer rim, where lawlessness and chaos reigned. For many, it seemed like a good deal. But for others, particularly the humans on Elysis, the UGC's vision of peace was little more than an excuse to exert their control over worlds that had long lived outside their influence. Elysis was a small, rugged world on the farthest edge of known space. Colonized by humans who had been cast out by the UGC or who had simply chosen to live on the fringes of the galaxy, Elysis was a planet of hard men and women, survivors who had built a life for themselves far from the prying eyes of the Empire. Life on Elysis was harsh, unforgiving, and often dangerous. The planet's surface was rocky, the atmosphere thin, and its ecosystems filled with hostile creatures. But for those who had chosen to live there, it was a place of freedom. A place where they could live on their own terms, without the interference of galactic powers. The humans of Elysis were fiercely independent, proud of their ability to survive where others would have perished. But that independence came at a cost. The UGC had long since written off Elysis as inconsequential. They had no resources worth harvesting, no strategic value to be gained by controlling the planet. The inhabitants of Elysis were considered little more than a curiosity, a group of human exiles who had made their homes in the distant corners of the galaxy. The UGC had better things to do than to waste resources on a backwater planet like Elysis. That was, until they discovered something about the planet that changed everything. The UGC had always been a predator, moving through the galaxy with the cold efficiency of a machine. They consumed resources, expanded their empire, and crushed those who resisted. But for all their power, the UGC had a weakness, a tendency to underestimate their enemies, to believe that their superior technology and vast fleets made them invincible. And they made that mistake again when they turned their eyes on Elysis. Colonel Oren Clark had spent much of his life serving in the UGC's Interstellar Frontier Corps, an elite division tasked with maintaining control over the far reaches of the Empire. He had seen his fair share of rebellions, of uprisings in the most unlikely of places. But Elysis was different. It wasn't a world with a formal government, a powerful military, or advanced technology. It was a planet of survivors, farmers, engineers, and traders who had long since learned how to fend for themselves. The people of Elysis had never sought the UGC's protection, nor had they ever shown any interest in joining the Empire. They had made their home in the outer reaches of space, beyond the UGC's reach. But the UGC had grown tired of such colonies. They saw them as potential threats, places where dissidents and rebels could hide, where people might gather to challenge their rule. And so, they decided to act. They deployed their fleet to Elysis with the intention of bringing the planet under their control, forcibly if necessary. When the UGC arrived, their presence was swift and overwhelming. Massive warships descended from the heavens, their engines burning like the fury of gods. Thousands of troops dropped onto the surface, their boots pounding the earth as they marched toward their objectives. The people of Elysees had no way of fighting back. The UGC's technology was far beyond anything they could muster. Their cities were unprepared for the onslaught. There were no advanced defense systems, no weapons that could hold off the invaders. The humans of Elysees were faced with an enemy they could not hope to defeat in a direct confrontation. Yet, what the UGC didn't realize was that the people of Elysees were more than just survivors. They were fighters, and while they may have lacked advanced technology, they had something far more dangerous, the will to resist. Mira Lorne was one of the many who had grown up on Elysees. A brilliant engineer with a keen understanding of machinery and technology, Mira had always seen the world differently. She didn't believe in the inevitability of the UGC's rule. She had heard the stories of humanity's past, of revolutions, of uprisings, of rebellions against greater powers. She had heard the tales of human courage, of how entire civilizations had stood against the might of empires and won. Mira believed that the same could be true for Elysees. But she also knew that winning against the UGC would not be easy. They were an empire built on power and control. Their fleets were vast, their military tactics flawless, and they would not hesitate to burn Elysees to the ground if it meant bringing the planet into their fold. It was Oren Clark who first recognized the reality of their situation. Oren was no fool. He had spent decades in the UGC's service and knew what their response would be. They would strike hard, and they would strike fast. But if there was any chance of surviving, it lay in resistance guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and hit-and-run tactics. The people of Elysees would have to fight like ghosts, strike when the enemy least expected, and then disappear into the terrain. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be pretty, but it was their only chance. The first strike came days after the UGC arrived. A convoy of supply ships, laden with resources for the invaders, was ambushed by a small group of resistance fighters led by Mira. They didn't have the luxury of advanced weapons, but they had ingenuity on their side. Using crude explosives and old, repurposed military tech, they disabled the convoy's shields and destroyed several of the vehicles, forcing the UGC to retreat in confusion. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a message. A message that the humans of Elysees would not be cowed. Word of the attack spread like wildfire, not only across the planet but throughout the galaxy. The human resistance on Elysees was not a fluke. It was the beginning of something much larger. The resistance on Elysees began to attract the attention of other human colonies, places that had been abandoned by the UGC, colonies that had been forgotten by the Empire. These were the outsiders, people who had been living in the shadows for years, cut off from the main galactic network. Many had once been part of the UGC, but had been cast aside for various reasons. Some were former soldiers who had deserted, while others were refugees who had fled the UGC's oppressive policies. These exiled humans had been living on the fringes of galactic civilization, but now they had a reason to unite, the fight for their freedom. Through clandestine communications and covert operations, the resistance on Elysees began to link up with these other human colonies. It wasn't long before the idea of a galactic human resistance movement began to take shape. The humans of Elysees, the people who had been abandoned, were now united by a single cause, to reclaim their independence from the UGC. The UGC, meanwhile, was struggling to understand what was happening. At first, they had seen the resistance as a small, localized problem. But the longer the conflict dragged on, the more they realized that the humans of Elysees were not like the other rebellious worlds they had dealt with. They were relentless, resourceful, and stubborn. Every time the UGC thought they had the upper hand, the resistance would strike back, harder and faster. Captain Ilara Tern, the commander of the UGC forces on Elysees, was tasked with one goal: to crush the resistance, no matter the cost. She had been trained for this. She had dealt with insurgencies before. But something about this one was different. The humans of Elysees fought like they had nothing to lose, like their very existence depended on their victory. And perhaps, in a way, it did. But the tide of battle was about to turn. Mira Lorne, with the help of a growing network of resistance fighters, had begun to gather information about UGC weaknesses. She had spent months studying their tactics, their logistics, and their technology. Slowly, she had begun to unravel the UGC's strategies, finding cracks in their armor. And it was within these cracks that humanity's chance of victory lay. The final showdown was coming. It would not be won through superior weapons or greater numbers. It would be won by the spirit of the people of Elysees and by the sheer force of will that they had cultivated over generations. The humans who had once been seen as outsiders, as insignificant, would now stand at the forefront of a new chapter in galactic history. A chapter written by those who refused to bow to tyranny. And they would fight back with everything they had.